Hey, welcome to another Code with Jason Meetup. This is the Code with Jason Meetup Europe edition. And today we're going to today we're going to talk about freelancing. Last Thursday we did a freelancing session also for the US version of the Code with Jason Meetup. We had a guest, Jeremy Smith, and that went really well. We'll put the video up for that. Today it's just me. I'm going to give some of my experience freelancing and some of my background and stuff like that. I don't have a specific agenda. I'm going to kind of talk about my history and some things I've learned and some common advice that I give people who ask questions. And if any point anybody has any questions, feel free to just interrupt me and ask. That's totally fine. Or you can type in the chat, either way you prefer. And I did solicit questions before I did this session, and the vast majority of the questions were regarding how to get clients. And I think that's the best question to ask, because if you can get good clients as a freelancer, then the other stuff like setting up your legal structure of your business and getting business cards and all that stuff, all those things are trivialities by comparison. And if you can't get good clients, then none of that other stuff matters very much anyway, because you're going to be impoverished and stressed and all that stuff. Okay, so a little bit about my background. I've been programming since I was a kid. I started in the mid-90s, just programming for fun because we had computers around the house because my dad's a programmer. Got my first real job in 2005, and then I first went freelance in 2011. And then I've been freelance on and off ever since then. When I first started freelancing, I made very little money. I'm happy to share a little bit of the numbers if people are interested. The first year, I think I made less than $30,000. And then my income gradually went up. For reference, at that point in time, I think my highest salary was like $60,000. So my first year freelancing, I was half my highest salary up to that point. So that was a step in the wrong financial direction. But then my income went up and up, past $100,000, past $200,000, and then ultimately well into the 200,000s. So I figured out how to be more successful with it as time went on. And like I said, the key to the whole thing is finding good clients, high quality clients who pay well, clients who you can have a good relationship with and stuff like that. So the first thing that I usually talk about with regard to getting clients is kind of the two sales and marketing methods. I refer to them as hunting versus farming. So with hunting, you go out and you try to kill something. 9 times out of 10, you come back empty-handed. But when you're successful in your hunt, you have something to eat right now. Whereas with farming, you plant seeds, you do a lot of work over a long period of time, but you don't get your fruits of your labor until quite a long time in the future. But farming, well, we're getting a little outside the metaphors now, but the farming methods can yield better, more reliable results. So what that means in terms of freelancing is like some hunting methods could include like looking on job boards, going to professional events to try to meet potential clients. Like maybe you go to a conference with the objective of getting a client at that specific conference and coming home with an actual contract gig or whatever it is. That's another form of hunting. And then some methods of farming are a lot of the things that I do, like blogging, podcasting, this meetup, making YouTube videos or whatever other kind of videos, speaking at conferences, just even attending conferences, a lot of that stuff. A lot of times when people ask me how to get freelancing clients, I say tongue in cheek, meet a bunch of people and wait 10 years. And it's kind of a tongue in cheek thing, but it's actually also quite true. Because a lot of the freelance gigs that I've gotten, they've been from people who I'd met 5 or 10 years earlier and never got any business from their direction for years and years, but then it finally came together. So part of it is really a long-term type thing. And my advice to people who are new to freelancing is to do a mixture of both. I think early on, you kind of have to do a lot of hunting by necessity, but then you can, because obviously you can't. If you need to eat now, you can't plant a seed in the ground and wait for it to grow. You need something now. So one thing that a lot of freelancers do, I've done this myself, is if you want to go freelance, take your current employer and try to turn them into your first freelance client. Because the people who are most likely to want to pay you in the future are the people who have paid you in the past. So, and even more so, the people who are paying you right now, they're likely to keep paying you. So just ask them if you can change your relationship. A lot of freelancers get started that way. And then once you've done that, and maybe that works, maybe it doesn't, but once you've done that, you can go back to all your past employers and just let them know, hey, I'm available for freelancing now. If you need any help, if you want to work together again, but in a freelance capacity this time, we can do that. Once you've done that, you can reach out to, for example, all your past coworkers, because maybe your coworkers now work at different jobs. And so you have more of a reach to a lot more different companies. And then you can just reach out to people in general and do the same thing. Just let them know that you're freelancing now. And these are kind of in order of best and most likely to work to worse and less likely to work, for lack of a better way to put it. So after those things, I suggest hitting the job boards, and you can find explicit freelance gigs there, but you can also find jobs. And as long as they don't explicitly say no freelancers, you can pitch them on hiring a contractor instead of a full-time employee. Jack, I see your raised hand there.
Yeah, a question. I'm guessing that you need some level of time at your current employer before you try to convert them into a freelance gig. Any suggestions on like a minimum amount of time, 1, 2, 3 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't thought about that before. Obviously, you can't work there for like a week and then say like, let's go freelance. I mean, obviously you could, but that would be kind of weird. Um, I don't know. I would go by the gut feel of like how the relationship feels. Because if it's like a highly trusting relationship and you feel like your presence there is highly valued, like they really wouldn't want to let you go, then I would feel more comfortable doing it sooner. Um, and if those things were less true, I would be more inclined to wait until I felt more secure. And it also, of course, depends on your entire situation, like whether you have savings, whether you feel like you have other prospects, whether you have a family you're supporting like me, and if your income goes away, your family has zero income, all those things. But yeah, I don't think there's a right answer. I think I would just go with my gut on that. Anthony.
So when prospecting for clients for freelancing, do you find it's the time cost benefit of working with startups is better, or a more established company joining as a freelancer for a larger development team?
That's a good question. Early on, I think it's good to take what you can get, no matter what it is. And I don't know if one is better than the other. There's like so many different factors to consider, including just your own personality and what your preferences are and stuff like that. Because obviously the culture is going to be much different. Like I've done both. I've worked for startups, and there's such a spectrum of quality when it comes to startups. Some startups they have They have their shit together. But other startups, it's just like some guy. And sometimes I've worked for clients where they're paying me lots of money, but they don't even have a real business. It's just like some harebrained idea the guy came up with, and he's paying me to write code, even though he doesn't really have any customers. And so startups can really run the gamut between really well organized and really chaotic. And like the worst example, I was working for these two guys, and they had this kind of fake business. And they wouldn't even respond to my emails or phone calls. Like, they were paying me every week, and once in a while they would kind of give me some vague direction, but there weren't really any customers. There wasn't really a plan. And again, these guys wouldn't even respond to my emails. Totally bizarre. And so that's like at the far extreme of disorganization. So that, to be clear, that's not a good kind of gig to have at all. Like, that's just not good. But it's going to be especially bad if you're relatively inexperienced in general, because like, even if it's a real startup, and it's not this like crazy situation that I had, a lot of times you're going to have to bring the structure, and it's almost like okay, there's jobs where like you get hired so they can tell you what to do and they provide the structure. And then there's other jobs where they hire you because they see you as being an expert and more experienced than them, and you're telling them what to do. And so some of my jobs have been like that, where like I get hired, and this doesn't matter whether it's a freelance gig or a regular job, but I get hired and we start to build a dev team, and my boss asks me like, well, how should we do this? Like, how should we run the team? And then I come and I say, well, we should do this, this, and this. We should, whatever it is. There's a big difference there between like somebody who has 20 years of experience being hired to tell other people what to do versus somebody very early on who needs that structure and needs to learn. Whereas I still need to learn too, obviously, but like I already know very well what I'm doing and I can run a team myself. So I say that because the startups, you're more likely to find that like less organized into the spectrum. So if you're not very experienced, I might be cautious about entering a situation like that, because you can have a bad experience. When I was really inexperienced, I worked for a certain startup. They didn't have a lot of structure. I didn't know what I was doing, and it turned out really bad for everybody. And it ended up making me look really bad. My client wasn't happy. It was just a really painful experience all around. And I wish that I just had never worked for that organization at that time. Now it would be fine. But back then, for who I was and who they were, it wasn't a good fit at the time. And then a larger organization, they're likely to have more structure, but it might be a lot more rigid. For example, a lot of those gigs are like staff augmentation gigs. You're technically self-employed, but you're working like 40 hours a week. You're working alongside their team, going to all the same meetings as them. Maybe you even have to go to the office just like them. So it's not much of a difference you're not gaining any freedom or extra money or anything like that. It's just you're a glorified employee. Anthony, hopefully that speaks to some of what you're curious about. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a consideration that I've had in the past. And when I was in between jobs, like, do I go freelance or do I find another full-time job? On that side of the other side of that thing, like, how do you fire gracefully your client when you are done with their relationship?
That's a great question. My approach to that is to prepare for it right from the start. So a lot of freelancers will start working for a client and they'll set no expectation regarding how long it'll last. And then it becomes kind of painful and maybe awkward when it needs to end. What I started doing at some point is when I get a new client, I would say, let's work together for an initial trial period of 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is. And then at the end of that 3 months, we'll either renew and do another 3 months, or we'll part ways at that time. That way, when you reach that 3-month period, and if you decide you want to go, you don't have to have this thing where you like have to schedule a meeting with your client and have that's never a pleasant conversation to have, and it's going to be unexpected for your client and all that. If you have a specific date that you set right from the very beginning and you say, okay, at this point, I think we've gone through our initial period, I'm going to go in a different direction, blah blah blah, that works out a lot better than if it's just no expectation is set at all. And speaking of the trial period idea, I actually like to do a really tiny project at the beginning, then slightly bigger, then slightly bigger. Like, I think it can be good to start. I did this once with a client, to start with just like a small weekend project that's like 10 hours, because then you can, it limits the risk on both sides. Like, if they turn out to be some crazy psycho who you don't want to work with, you can find that out in the beginning, and that way you're only out like a weekend rather than now being dependent on this client for your income. So I did that with a client. We did like a weekend project. That went well. We did a project that was like a week or two. That went well. We did a project that was like a couple months. That went well. Then we rode off into the sunset together. We worked together for like 4 years. Yeah, so that's I think a good way to do it. So those gradually expanding trial projects, and then again, the like, we work together for 3 months, then 3 months, then 3 months, whatever, those can be good too. And another thing that does is this: a very common freelancing question is, what do I do when a client stiffs me? And the answer to that is, you probably can't do anything. And the real answer is, don't work for the kind of clients who stiff you. And how do you not work for the kind of clients who stiff you? You do the thing I just said, which is to do a small trial project, then a little larger project, and then you do more of a commitment after that. Because that initial project lets your client develop a reputation with you regarding how they're going to pay. If they pay you immediately, that's obviously good. If you have to hound them for the check for that one weekend project, then that's a red flag, and maybe you don't want to work with that client. So yeah, the answer to that question is just make sure you can trust the client before you make a big commitment to them. Okay. Any other questions before I continue? At this point, I don't have like a specific agenda or anything. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to go in that direction. Okay.
Well, you bounced off of red flags. What are some of the biggest red flags you've seen so far?
Yeah, good question. What are some of the biggest red flags I've seen? Oh, well, here's one. Wanting to sign an NDA. It's not that there's anything wrong with an NDA. It's just that that's usually a sign of inexperience. Because nobody's going to steal your idea. You know, most of these ideas are not worth anything. And even if they were, like, people aren't just sitting around. Smart, capable people aren't just sitting around waiting for ideas to steal. So if somebody wants me to sign an NDA because they're afraid somebody's going to steal their idea, that to me is just a sign of naivete and inexperience. And so they might not be the best client to work with. That's one. Poor communication is another. You know, we've probably all had instances where we receive an email from somebody and we read the email and it's like, what are you talking about? What do you want? And then you have to email back just saying, what do you mean? Send. And it's like, if you have to send things like that, then that's not good. I can't think of a lot of other red flags. I mean, when I talk with a prospective client, a big part of it is just like, what's my gut feel? Like, do I feel like I like this person or not? Does this person seem smart? Do they not? I go by feeling a lot more than logic. Yeah, so that's all I can think of off the top of my head. I'll let you know if I think of anything else. I see in the chat here, how about determining prices and hourly versus project? Oh, I had an employer who would send me emails in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. That's pretty interesting. Okay, determining prices and hourly versus project. That's a really good question. So this can be easy actually in the beginning. There's kind of a heuristic that a lot of freelancers use, which is take your annual salary and divide it by like 2,000. So let's say if you make $50,000 a year, charge 50 bucks an hour. If you make $100,000 a year, charge $100 an hour, and so on. And that works out to be roughly equivalent. The idea being, obviously $100 an hour full time is like 200 grand a year. But you're not going to make 200 grand a year billing $100 an hour, because there is what they call frictional unemployment, the gaps between your gigs. You have to factor in no paid vacation, and you have to factor in the US at least, paying for your own health care, stuff like that. So that's why you need that higher rate in order to get the same equivalent salary. And then I think it's good to try to periodically raise your rates. And that's what I did. I started off at 50 bucks an hour, then I raised it to 75, 100, up and up. And once I got to about 150, once I started trying to go from $100 an hour to 150, people started asking me the question. They said, okay, I'm paying everybody else around 100 bucks an hour. Why should I pay you so much more than everybody else? And I didn't have an answer. And in fact, there was no good reason for them to pay me more than everybody else. And so what you have to do if you want to get to those rates is you have to do something that's not easy, which is you have to provide a good reason. And it can't just be something you say, it has to be something real. And so for me, now I can charge higher rates than most people because I'm in some small circles, I'm famous. And so that helps. And it's not just that. The fact that I've like written a bazillion blog posts and given all these conference talks and I do this and all that stuff. People have to have some way to assess your abilities and assess your value. And so if I have all this material publicly available, people can get to know me over sometimes even a period of years before we even talk. And so they can assess my abilities and they can say, okay, I've heard Jason on the podcast a million times. I know who he is. I know that I can trust him. I know he's smart, whatever. And so they can hire you and they're willing to pay you more because it's not a gamble. They know they're going to get the value out of it. Whereas back then, I was just nobody. I was just some guy trying to get this bigger rate than everybody else for no good reason. And people said no, and they should have said no. So that's what's needed in order to get above those lower rates. Okay, Craig saying, I've not heard of that divide by 2,000 before. I've raised prices between every client starting at $15 an hour. And I'm laughing, but it says haha in the chat too, but not yet increased prices for existing clients yet. Yeah, that's a little harder to raise prices for existing clients. Because the thing is, in order to do that, you have to be prepared for them to go away. Because if you say I'm raising my rate and they say no, and you say, okay, you can just pay me the same, then like you've lost all credibility and you can never raise your rate in the future because you've shown yourself to be soft and your rate increase was apparently not real. So you have to give the client a choice, an implicit choice. Don't actually say this, but the choice is pay my new higher rate or we're done. And so that's tough because that's obviously a risk. If I've ever raised a rate on an existing client, I don't remember it. I think my preference and what I would even do now is just keep the existing clients at the same rate and do a new higher rate for everybody new. Okay, what other questions do people have?
Since we're on the topic of rates,
Mhm.
do you think when you were starting out, did you have multiple rates that you would offer? Like, okay, I'm gonna build up this feature for you. It's gonna be X amount for per hour or X for the feature. Then I'll do some maintenance once, twice a month for X amount of dollars. Do you schedule it that way in your contracts, or was it just kind of a flat rate? This is what you're going to get me for, and this is how much I'm going to work for you per month on. I'll give you 25 hours in a month to ongoing for 3-4 months at a time.
Yeah, good question. By the way, that reminds me to get back to the determining hourly versus per project question from Craig. But it was pretty much just the same rate for everybody and just straight hourly. There was rarely an agreement that I would work a certain number of hours per week or something like that. I mean, there was a rough agreement. I would agree that like I'll work for you about 30 hours a week, but I would never say exactly. I have before and I've regretted it because for some reason it's like if I say I'm going to work 40 hours a week, then I end up working like 38 hours a week. And if I say I'm going to work 30 hours a week, I end up working like 28 hours a week. I can somehow like never get to it like hurts me to have to work a certain specific number of hours for some reason. I don't quite get it, but I've learned, part of all this is like learning about yourself and what you can and can't do and stuff like that. Something I've learned about myself is that it's not good for me to commit to a specific number of hours per week, only a rough number of hours. So that's how I structure that. And it was basically like regarding rate, I would have one rate that I would charge everybody. Some people think it's unethical to charge different clients different rates. I don't think that's correct. Different clients will get different value out of you. I might have a certain rate for consulting, but then if somebody hires me to mow their lawn, silly example, but if I mow somebody's lawn, I'm not going to charge them hundreds of dollars per hour to mow their lawn, so there's different value to different clients. And I think it makes a lot of sense to charge according to the value that's produced. So that's my thought on that. But no, most of it was just the same rate. And the thing here's something really important that I should have said earlier. In my experience, 90+% of programmers are just doing like staff augmentation, which again is like, you're basically an employee. You get a client, you work roughly full time, maybe a little less, go to all their same meetings. You're just working on Jira tickets like everybody else. You work for the same client for maybe a period of years. It's basically the same as having a job. That's the case with like 90% of freelance programmers, in my experience. So those questions that you asked, Anthony, about like maintenance and stuff like that, most of the time that doesn't apply because you're just working for one single client for a long period of time. To get back to the hourly versus per project, I mostly did hourly. I've found that doing per project can lead to great pain on both sides. I had this terrible idea one time that I would do pricing like per feature. And so like every feature turned into like this mini negotiation and this mini project. And it was just so exhausting for both parties. And nobody liked it. It didn't, sometimes I came out on top, sometimes they did, but it was like, it was really unnatural. It wasn't good. And then if you price per project for a really big project, then that's really risky because it could end up taking you way, way longer than you expected. And so your hourly rate just keeps going down and down, and you're incentivized to hurry, which isn't great. And hourly billing has its own problems too. Like you get penalized the more efficient you get, for example, but it's less risky for you. And hourly billing is very normal and it's very widely accepted. People expect you to bill hourly, so that's fine. I have done, okay, so you can bill non-hourly if you do different kinds of work. So for example, I've taught classes and I never bill hourly for teaching classes. I don't think that would make sense. And we can talk more about teaching as a way to get income too. But with these gigs, I would fly to the client location and teach a class there that was like 3 days or 5 days, usually somewhere in that range. I'd get paid a flat rate, and that's that. And I thought those were great. The trouble is you can't control when those gigs come your way, and it can lead to awkward gaps in between where you have a class here, a class here. You have 2 weeks in between that you kind of can't use for anything. And what do you do? So that was a little bit tough. And then right now I do consulting. So my distinction between consulting and contracting is with contracting, you're getting paid for labor. With consulting, you're getting paid for counsel. So my consulting clients hire me, they pay a flat fee per month. We do 4 meetings a month. And on those meetings, we do a screen share, and the person just either asks me questions or we look at some code together and ask for advice on, usually advice on like how to go about building a feature and how to go about testing a feature, testing existing code, something like that. But anyway, the point is my hands are not on the keyboard at all. I'm purely giving advice to the other person. And that's like kind of hourly, kind of not, you know, because they're paying me a monthly fee. And it's not like I'm going to work more or less hours per month or something like that. But you can work backward and convert it to an hourly rate if you want. But that's another kind of work that's easier to do on a more project type basis because it's, sorry, on a non-hourly basis because it's not a project. You're just getting paid for advice. Okay, what else? I'll give people a second to think. Okay. Well, the questions aren't immediately forthcoming. Let me maybe ask you guys some questions. Is anybody here a freelancer right now, or are you thinking about going freelancing, or are you just attending because you like to come to the Code with Jason meetup and you'll come whatever the subject is? Ori, sounds like maybe you have a thought.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm freelancing right now. I've got a contract for about 15 hours a week, and I'm a student alongside that. So it's kind of tough to balance the two. Do you have any advice with that, maybe? I mean, how to balance a workload between multiple clients?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so you said you're a student, and just now you said multiple clients, but right now, how many clients do you have?
Just the one client.
Just the one. Okay. Yeah. So if I were in your shoes, the first thing is I would keep just the one and not get multiple clients if I could avoid it. At one point in time, it was something like 9 clients all at the same time. It was madness, and I would never want to go back there. With consulting, it's different because I can have as many clients as I need to or as I want to, and it doesn't like take up mental space because once the call's over, I can stop thinking about it. Whereas having a freelance client is almost like having another class where it's like an ongoing responsibility that you always have to think about. I don't know if I have anything smart to say about juggling the school and the client, but I can tell you in general how I manage my time, and this may or may not be helpful. So I do a lot of stuff. As I mentioned, I do blogging, podcasting, these videos. I speak at conferences, other stuff I'm probably not even thinking. I organize my own conference. And then in my personal life, I have a family. I cook dinner and stuff like that. And I also have been learning Chinese, French, and Spanish. And then I read a lot of books too. So I do a lot of stuff. And I have a full-time job also. So like a lot of stuff. And sometimes people ask me like, how do I do all this stuff? And the thing is that I realized at some point that not all time is equal. Certain time is better used for certain things. Other time is better used for other things. So like when I'm in the car, I'll either listen to an audiobook or I'll listen to one of my language courses. And that way that time isn't wasted. I'm using it for something. I rarely just listen to music or something like that. And I have what I call reading stations. So like by my bed, I have a book. In the living room, I have a book. Here I have books. And I even keep a book in the car. Because like if I go like to the dentist or something and I have to wait, I hate being bored and I hate wasting time. So I'll bring a book with me everywhere. So if I have to wait, I can get in like 15 minutes of reading or something like that. So that's how I get in a lot of reading. And then another example is like Saturday mornings. A lot of people they're neither very productive on Saturday mornings, nor are they having a lot of fun on Saturday mornings at like 8 a.m. So every Saturday morning at 7:30 a.m., I meet with a Chinese friend of mine and we speak some Chinese and English. We're teaching each other. And that's like, I hardly feel it because it's time that's not used for anything else anyway. So it's like almost just bonus time. So that's kind of how I think about my time. Oh, and then like at different times, I'll have like different levels of mental energy and I'll have different moods. Like I go through bursts where I'm feeling very creative and full of ideas. And during those times, I'll write blog posts. And sometimes I just feel like turning the crank and getting some work done. And that's what I'll do then. So I like assess my mood before I start working and try to decide what kind of work to do. I don't try to force myself to do a kind of work that I'm not in the mood for unless it's an absolute necessity. Ori, is that helpful at all? Does it stir up any thoughts for how you can manage your time?
Yeah, definitely. There are some times where I feel really motivated to do client work, other times for work, uni work. And I guess you're saying to kind of go with that flow and just go with whatever your brain is letting you do in the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously exercising common sense at the same time. You can't do client work if you feel like it and don't feel like doing schoolwork, but you actually have to do schoolwork. Sometimes you just don't have a choice. The other thing I'll say is like the biggest productivity technique that I've learned that helps is also the simplest, which is just to shift your sleep schedule up and get up earlier and go to bed earlier. For whatever reason, it's like magical and it feels like you're adding hours to the day, even though you're not. You're still sleeping the same amount. Yeah, that's super, super helpful, at least to me. Okay, what other questions do people have?
You
Okay.
mentioned something earlier about the gap between clients and needing to, I'm sure a lot of us are wondering that financial stability with freelancing.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you with your 3-month process that you have with each of the clients, does that allow you to forecast when you need to get more clients versus needing to offload them? Or like, how do you balance your financial flow to make sure you're sustainable in the freelancing gigs?
Yeah. So yes, that does enable you to kind of plan ahead. Because if I know that I have a client and on March 1st, I want to leave that client, then, you know, in February, I can start looking for a different client. And when I find a good match, I can say I'm available to start March 1st. And so I can line that up before the other one ends. Or maybe I can't find a client and I have to just bite the bullet and do another 3 months and try again at that period of time. But that can in fact help you plan ahead like that and make that transition a little smoother. Ideally, you have like some savings, so that when a client relationship unexpectedly ends, or you just want to end it, you can, and it's not a big deal. I've never been very good at that, and that has hurt me. But another thing is your financial stability comes not so much from whatever your current source of income is, but your ability to get new income. I mentioned a few minutes ago that there was one point in time where I had 9 clients at once. I thought at the time that my stability came from having multiple clients, so that if one client went away, I still had all my other clients, and so I was more stable. But I realized that that was just a terrible way to live, having all these client engagements. It was so stressful, and I was underserving clients and stuff like that. It was really bad. So then later I decided to just have one client at a time, and my security came, again, not from that redundancy, but it came from having a strong ability to get a new client once that client relationship ended. I don't even remember the original question now, but hopefully that helps. What else? Okay, we're getting pretty close to the end of the hour here. I think I'm about ready to wrap it up. One thing that I want to mention to you guys before we go is I started a snail mail newsletter that some of you surely have heard about. I'm going to drop the link right now, and I encourage you guys to sign up. And I do send internationally, so you don't have to be in the US to receive these. There's about 140 people right now signed up for my snail mail newsletter. In this letter, I give programming tips. I talk about my personal life, what's going on with my personal life and stuff like that. And just random stuff too. Some stuff about ChatGPT. In next month's edition, I have a cocktail recipe. So it's just meant to be fun. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining me, and I will see you next time.
Cheers. Thanks very much.